The time is 6:45. It's a Sunday evening, a hot day in both Johannesburg and in Cape Town. It's not our usual jubilant self this evening. Israel is at war, and we welcome the many thousands of people who will be joining us this evening. We've had unbelievable registration. We're predicting that we'll be 7, 8, 10,000 people watching tonight's webinar. And we'll be going live at exactly 7 p.m. South African time, 8 p.m. Israel time. And we do pre-chat, as we always do before our webinars begin. And I welcome to our pre-chat both Michael Kranzdorf and Rowan Pollivin. And Rowan, let's start with you because you had a remarkable memorial service today. Tell us about it for those people who weren't able to join in person.
Thanks and good evening to everyone. It was a remarkable event of solidarity that we held in Johannesburg this morning, and another one we held in Cape Town this afternoon. In Johannesburg, we had well over 2,000 Jews, Christians, civil society groups, political parties, and everyone came together to show their solidarity and support for Israel, for this terrible conflict that's going on, for the terrible massacre that happened last week. And we were really heartened to see so much support across the political spectrum and across South African society, standing with the Jewish community and standing with Israel.
So you had some amazing speakers and unbelievable political support as well. Tell us about some of the political parties who were there.
We were very glad to see from the ACDP, the Patriotic Alliance, the DA, the various church groups, various members of civil organizations, and it was just really good to see that beyond the noise that we hear from the ANC and the EFF, there actually are supporters on the ground and groups who support Israel and political parties who have values over votes.
There were, in fact, beautiful church groups busy singing and dancing afterwards, and one really did get a sense of solidarity. We are not alone.
Exactly. We have supporters. There are millions of Christian Zionists in South Africa, and it is important that we listen to their voice and we hear their voice. They often pray in the churches, but we do see such support across the board from them. It was just remarkable to see them, as you say, how he's singing, dancing, support of Israel, standing with the Jewish community, and standing with Israel. And we will certainly remember who our friends are in this very difficult time.
And in fact, a remarkable speech by Gayton McKenzie, where he spoke about how the Americans went after Al-Qaeda after the attacks on 9/11, or as he called them, 9/11, and how Israel has to do the exact same thing. It must destroy this evil. And he did it with passion and vigor. And it's just so amazing to see South African politicians standing up for the right thing, especially in comparison to our current government.
Exactly right. And, you know, sometimes we're a bit shocked because we see such a barrage of hostility from our government, from areas of the media in South Africa, and from so many political parties. But as you said, Gayton McKenzie's speech was from the heart. It was powerful. It was strong. He told his story. He told how he went to Israel, saw Israel for himself, how he came back understanding the situation on the ground, pledged his solidarity with the South African Jewish community and with Israel. We even heard from Terry Lakota, who told about his obviously long history of witnessing South African apartheid and how there's absolutely no such thing in Israel. And of course, across the board, so the ACDP, who have always been very good friends of ours, who always stand on the right side of history. We had a representative from the DA, and we had the Shemba Church, and many, many other speakers.
So Michael Kranzdorf, you are quite renowned as a political analyst. Talk to us about your view of the South African government and the approach taken by the African National Congress. And the bizarre thing is, even though we shouldn't be shocked, I think many of us in the Jewish community have been deeply hurt and a deep sense of betrayal that Cyril Ramaphosa doesn't even have it within himself to be able to say, I genuinely feel and have condolences for the massacred 1,300 civilians in Israel, the 2,800 civilians who've been injured. He doesn't have it within himself to even express a modicum of sympathy, of empathy, of compassion. What is wrong with him?
Thanks, Howard. No, I agree with you completely. I think we're all in shock with his speech at the ANC-NEC conference yesterday. As you pointed out, not to condemn Hamas's barbarism, not to condemn the murder of children, the kidnapping. There's still over 100 people that have been kidnapped by Hamas. This is a war crime. Some of these people that are kidnapped are kids. We've seen pictures of babies. I mean, the government has a channel to Hamas. They have a relationship with Hamas. Why not call on Hamas to let those hostages go? I mean, so I think it's, the government has always supported the Palestinian cause, and we can accept that. But supporting the Palestinian cause is not the same as supporting any sort of action that they do. And when people commit barbaric acts like slaughtering old people, kidnapping children, and you expect a civilized government to condemn that. It doesn't take away from their support for the Palestinians, but you would expect them to condemn that. And it's very upsetting. The Jewish community, many Jews fought with the ANC against apartheid, and because of our own history of oppression. And now when Jewish people have been subject to a pogrom, what is effectively a pogrom, the worst pogrom since the Holocaust, the ANC is nowhere to be found. So I think we all feel very betrayed, quite honestly.
So before we go on, I just want to maybe show two videos that have been circulating around. The one deals specifically with the ANC approach, and Cyril Ramaphosa's what was silence until yesterday and now has become complicity. So let's look at that, and also this beautiful video, whether it's real or AI or computer generated is actually irrelevant, but this beautiful video of Ponte lit up in the Israeli flags. So Danny, you're on controls this evening. If you could just show us those two videos, I'd appreciate it.
Let there be no doubt. The United States has Israel's back.
I stand with Israel. The United Kingdom stands with Israel against this terrorism today, tomorrow, and always.
Hamas is not a militant organization. It is a sadistic, demonic, genocidal, terrorist death cult, and it must be defeated and destroyed.
Od yavo shalom aleinu, od yavo shalom aleinu, od yavo shalom aleinu, ve'al kulam. Od yavo shalom aleinu, od yavo shalom aleinu, od yavo shalom aleinu, ve'al kulam. Salam. Aleinu ve'achol ha'olam, salam, shalom, salam. Aleinu ve'achol ha'olam, salam, shalom.
So certainly some beautiful views that we've had there of Johannesburg. But all over the world, we've seen buildings lit up. In Sydney, we've seen the Opera House lit up. In New York, we've seen the Empire State Building lit up. We've seen in London buildings lit up. But there are two buildings that I'd love to discuss with everyone this evening. And the first is the Brandenburg Gate. To have in Germany an image of the Brandenburg Gate lit up in the Israeli flag. Rowan and Michael, that's something special, isn't it?
Very special.
It is something that you can't possibly imagine. What an absolute twist and turn of history from where Germany was to now flying the Israeli flag on the Brand Brigade. It is something inconceivable.
Something else that was inconceivable is actually in the next picture. And I want to explain to people the significance of this picture, because this is the Arch of Titus in Rome. And it was built just over 2,000 years ago, and it was built by the Romans to commemorate the destruction of Jerusalem. In fact, carved into the Arch of Titus is the only image of the menorah from the Second Temple, as the menorah was dragged from Jerusalem back to Rome in victory. It is a symbol of Jewish defeat. And yet, this week, it was lit up in the colors of the Israeli flag. That, true, is one of the great symbols of how the world has changed. Michael, your thoughts?
Amazing to think that was the last time really that there was a Jewish independent state, a Jewish kingdom, a Jewish, for many years we were stateless. And once again, we were defeated, but now we have it in Israel. And I think that's a symbol of that. We have in Israel, we have a state, and we've suffered a terrible tragedy, but there is a state, there is an army that can defend Jewish lives and will do so to prevent these kind of tragedies from in the future. And I think that's the miracle here, to say that we outlived the Romans and will outlive Hamas as well.
Yeah. So Ben, Rowan, give us a sense of where our community is holding at the moment, and we'll later on in our broadcast this evening, we'll talk about things that people can do. And for people who are joining us, we are live with pre-chat, but we're going live officially in about 3 minutes time at 7 p.m. And we just always have a pre-chat at this point in time to get people comfortable, to welcome everyone, as thousands and thousands of people join us from around the world on Zoom, on YouTube, and on Facebook. So Rowan, where do you believe our community is at the moment?
So Howie, it is an extremely difficult time for our community because we effectively have been thrown under the bus by President Ramaphosa and the ANC government, who have, with the garnishing of the Palestinian scarves, effectively taken the side of terrorists who murder the innocent and against Israel and against the values of the Jews. So we had a very difficult time. We under assault on the media and various other places. However, I must say the unity we saw today, the spirit we saw today with our community, the coming together across the religious and political spectrum on our community is in fact heartwarming in this very difficult time. So if one can take any positive out of this absolute tragedy, our community is standing up for Israel, our community is standing strong and will continue to do so as this war continues on.
So we joined as well. Avi, welcome. This is in fact your first time on one of these. I apologize that we've never had you on before. We started these programs at the beginning of COVID. We thought we'd do one or two to help people through the COVID situation. And we first thought a few hundred people would arrive, but thousands of people arrived. And this is our 161st broadcast that we've done, now watched by in excess of 4 million people around the world. So as we move to 7 o'clock, we'd love the people watching us on YouTube, on Zoom, and on Facebook, just to take a moment and tell us where in the world you're watching us from. So if you could just take a moment, we'd love to display to people what our international audience looks like as we go towards our 7 p.m. start here and our 8 p.m. start in Israel. Avi, maybe we turn to you for just one moment and say, how do you feel at this moment in time? I know there were sirens, certainly in Tel Aviv at approximately 6 p.m. this evening. How are you feeling?
Well, first of all, let me say that I'm never happier than when I'm surrounded by South Africans. South Africa is one of my favorite places, and I can't wait to the next chance I have to go to Cape Town, which I've been to quite a few times. But I do wish it were under happier circumstances. This is a very almost surreal time to be in Israel. I was just on a different call where I described it as though I feel like I'm walking around in a daze. And I think a lot of Israelis feel similarly. I think what happened last weekend was completely unimaginable. We never could have predicted that 1,300 people could be murdered in a single day. We
So
understand that's
let's not get into the story
Yeah.
yet, because we're going to do that
Okay.
just after 7.
Okay.
But just tell us, how are you and your family doing physically, emotionally? Just what are you feeling?
Physically, we're fine. But I think, like many Israelis, we are in a state of shock. Many Israelis are in a very real sense of mourning, mourning losses of loved ones, of colleagues, of neighbors, of friends. There's a great deal of uncertainty about what might transpire next. We understand that Israel may be on the brink of a ground offensive that affects many hundreds of thousands of people who have been called up for the reserves, and then of course their families and their colleagues and their friends who are waiting at home. This is something that has affected all of Israeli society, not only the attack of last week, but the aftermath is something that all Israelis are feeling. The sense of uncertainty is particularly acute amongst those whose loved ones, they don't know what happened with them. There are some people who have not yet been identified. We don't know if they are alive in Hamas captivity or dead, their body lying somewhere without their family even knowing about it. This is a state that many people in Israel, many families are in right now, and it certainly permeates throughout Israeli society. And so that's the feeling that many of us are feeling right now.
Well, welcome. It's good to have you here, and we will definitely have you back under much better circumstances. The time has just gone 7 p.m. South Africa time, 8 p.m. Israel time, and we noticed that approximately 1 hour ago, in fact, the batteries, the Patriot batteries, the Iron Dome batteries were busy firing over Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, taking out rockets. I presume they were primarily Iron Dome, but Danny, maybe we just start this evening with a view of what it looked like exactly an hour ago over Tel Aviv. So to everyone who's joined us from around the world, a huge welcome. We will be full on Zoom tonight. We will be at capacity. So if you do have friends and family who want to watch us but are unable to get onto Zoom, please direct them either to our Facebook broadcast or alternatively our YouTube broadcast under the SA Jewish Report on YouTube, and they'll be able to watch. We have unlimited capacity there as well. But for those of you who are watching us tonight on YouTube, please press like and subscribe. That certainly helps us, and it helps us notify you about further programs that we'll be having. This is definitely not the last one we'll be having about the current conflict, I'm afraid. But a big welcome to all of our guests from the South African Jewish Report. This is the 161st broadcast that we've done in the last 3 years, now watched by more than 4 million people around the globe. And we've been joined by a massive international audience. So if you haven't told us where in the world you're watching us from, please take a moment and tell us in the chat section on YouTube, on Facebook, and on Zoom exactly where you're watching us from. In addition to that, please don't forget the South African Jewish Report, who brings you these webinars, is still publishing. This is the front page of our edition we did this week. For the first time in the 24-year history of the newspaper, we published with basically a black front page and a Yortzeit candle. We're living in unprecedented times. And so a huge thank you to Peter Cross, the editor of the Jewish Report, and her amazing team for a remarkable edition. If you haven't managed to pick up a hard copy, and you know we distribute through Checkers and through Discam and in exclusive books and in spaza shops and in restaurants and in kosher butcheries, and we in approximately 240 locations free of charge around South Africa. If you haven't been able to pick up a hard copy edition, I strongly urge you to go onto our website. The address is www.sajr.co, and there you can either download the full edition or alternatively look at each individual article as it stands. Also a reminder that our webinars are all available online. All you have to do is go onto our YouTube channel and all of our webinars are there. Some of them have been watched in excess of 100,000 times. So if you know anyone who's missed tonight's webinar, please make sure they go onto either our page at www.sajr.co.za, or alternatively, that they go onto our YouTube channel to be able to catch up and watch this webinar as well. So, Michael, I'm going to ask you to go onto mute and to turn up your video, and we're going to turn to Ben. Ben, if I could ask you to unmute and turn on your camera. You join us from the IDF spokesperson's office. A big welcome to you this evening. We've asked you to give us an update of where we stand at the current moment.
Thank you. Well, thank you for having us. It's a chance to speak in my natural accent, so it's much appreciated. It's been a week since those horrendous events, but it's all so fresh in everyone's minds, particularly because it's taken so long to start hearing the survivor stories. And every day we're hearing more stories. Every day our soldiers are going through each of the towns where those Hamas terrorists invaded and finding more bodies, some mutilated evidence. Just today, the IDF showed the international press some of the weaponry that was found on Hamas terrorists, and it gives an understanding of how much worse this could have been had they been able to carry out their full plan. So the country is very much going through a trauma, and in a country of 9 million people, to have so many killed, you almost certainly know someone who was affected by this directly. But at the same time, we're in the midst of a very intensive war, and the entire country is involved in that war. We've called up over 300,000 reserve troops, in addition to our standing army. Almost the entire country has galvanized a civilian effort to support both the soldiers and those families affected. And obviously, everyone's under direct rocket attack, both from the south and from the north. So while we're in the midst of this trauma, we're also in the midst of this war. And our war is a war on Hamas. We're attacking them within its scope and intensity and a scale which has never been done before. Hundreds of targets every few hours from the south to the north of Gaza. We're attacking Hamas military targets, command and control centers, rocket launching sites, weapons depots, terrorists themselves, and so on. We've had successes. We've killed some of the senior Nukhba commanders. Nukhba is their special forces who were responsible for many of the massacres on Saturday. And tomorrow, if you follow our press releases, you'll see some more successes like that. But Hamas's war is a war on civilians. It started with their massacre of our women, of our children, of our entire families, almost entire communities wiped out. We all know how tight kibbutzim are, that the community there is very much like a family. A place like Kibbutz Be'eri of 1,000 members who lost over 100 members. It's like having your entire family wiped out. So in addition to attacking our civilians, they've abducted our civilians. Tens of our civilians are in Gaza. And of course, they're attacking our civilians with their rockets, which is something that started on Saturday and hasn't stopped until this very moment. And on the flip side, inside Gaza, they're waging war on their own civilians in that they put them in the line of fire deliberately. There's not one military base in Gaza. All of their military operations, all of their infrastructure is under the civilian environment. It's in homes, it's under mosques, schools, firing from UN shelters, firing from hospitals, all well-documented practices that Hamas has done in the past. And that makes it very challenging. For 20 years, almost, Hamas has been governing Gaza, and instead of investing in its people, instead of investing in its territory, it's used all its money, support, funds, resources, things it gets from its regional partners and its backers like Iran, just to develop terror and to plan attacks like they carried out last week and since then. So it's a difficult fight, and we know that it's going to be a protracted one, but we're doing it successfully so far. At the same time, we're making an effort to mitigate civilian harm, because we know that a lot of people are not supportive or were not involved in these attacks. One of the biggest things we've been doing recently, which has been receiving attention, is giving evacuation recommendations to people in the North Gaza Strip. suggesting people in Gaza City and north of that move southwards, where we will be operating in a less intensive manner in order for their safety. That's proving to be difficult in and of itself, A, because it's a massive thing to do, and B, because Hamas has deliberately and purposefully been trying to stop people from evacuating by calling on people to ignore the evacuations, to setting up roadblocks, to potentially even detonating explosives along the routes to stop people from doing that. The humanitarian situation is also something that's been getting attention. The situation was not good to start with. Hamas didn't invest in its population, as we all know. And on the first day of the attacks, 9 out of the 10 electricity lines that run from Israel into Gaza were taken out of action by Hamas rockets. Israel provides about 10% of Gaza's water through 3 water lines. One of those was hit by Hamas rockets. The main crossing into Gaza from Israel, the Erez crossing, which before last Saturday, tens of thousands of Gazans would pass through every day to work inside Israel, was attacked by Hamas, almost completely destroyed. All the people and the soldiers who work there either killed or abducted. And the other main crossing, the Kerem Shalom crossing, is in the range of mortar fire from Gaza, so is closed. So even if Israel wanted to facilitate the provision of humanitarian aid, it's not feasibly practical at the moment. Today, we did renew some supply of water into the south of Gaza, and we have a dedicated unit that monitors that situation, is in touch with international organizations, regional partners, and other allies in order to monitor that situation. So that's, and obviously we don't control the Rafah crossing, which borders with Egypt. So we don't control what goes in and out from there. That's the situation in the south. Yes.
Yeah. So Ben, the questions coming in, and of course we invite everyone to ask questions as we go, whether you're watching on Zoom or Facebook or on YouTube. Please feel free to post a comment or a question, and we'll certainly bring them across. One of the questions is the communities in the south of Israel. Are they being evacuated? Places like Sderot, are people being moved away from the front lines of the battle, or are civilians still in those areas?
Yes, those communities have been evacuated. All the communities around the Gaza area were evacuated. We didn't force people to leave, but we gave everyone the option to leave and help them leave, and have given them temporary accommodation elsewhere in the country. It amounts to, I think, close to 20,000 people have been displaced. Entire communities, some of which were half destroyed, have now been emptied, and including big places like Sderot. So we have evacuated all the communities around Gaza. Even though we've repaired all the breaches in the security fence around Gaza, and we have massive forces down there, still is an active war zone. We're still having attempted infiltrations and attempted attacks. So that's been evacuated. In recent hours, we've also declared a closed zone up in the north, 4 kilometers from the north of the Lebanese border, and that's due to the developments that's been going on in the northern border. Over the past few days, we've had a number of attacks, both from Lebanon and from Syria. Anti-tank fire, rocket attacks, infiltration by drones, and so on. We've repelled or thwarted every single one of them. But because of the uptick in these attacks, the army has declared a closed military zone in the north as well. No communities there have been evacuated yet, but it is in heightened alert.
So tell us, obviously people have enormous fear, people watching us, about what happens when Israeli ground forces move in. It's one thing to bombard Gaza from the air, but there are a lot of people sitting in tanks and in vehicles on the border. There's great fear about a ground war. Should people be fearful?
Well, I think people should be fearful of war in any situation. It's not a pleasant thing, and certainly not something that we seek. I think there's no choice. I think that Israel has made its aims here and its priorities very clear. It's decided that it can no longer have a threat like Hamas sitting across your border, literally your neighbor. It's like if it's been a week since those attacks. Just imagine a week after 9/11, Americans wake up and Al-Qaeda's sitting a couple of 100 meters away in its backyard. So Israel decided that threat can no longer exist, and we cannot risk having a genocidal terrorist organization with the intent or the capabilities or the desire to carry out these kinds of attacks again, and that has to go. So whatever's needed in order to take away those military capabilities and to make sure they cannot do it again, that's what will be done. At the moment, that's airstrikes, but yes, we have a lot of forces amassing the Gaza border and preparing for a potential ground operation. And if that's declared necessary, then that's what they'll do. Ground forces does bring in a whole lot of extra challenges. You have, now you have, while our civilians are under fire, and indeed our soldiers in the area around Gaza are under fire, you don't have actually forces inside Gaza City going house by house in urban combat, and that raises a whole nother issue of the safety of your forces, particularly in a place like Gaza, where, as I mentioned, Hamas has had 20 years to embed itself. Instead of turning it into the Singapore of the region, it's turned itself into a terrorist hotspot, and entire streets, suburbs, neighborhoods, even cities are built for urban warfare. Hamas, as we all know, these networks of tunnels under the ground. It has openings in houses from which it can pop up from, conduct anti-tank fire, disappear underneath, come behind you, and do the same thing. Entire suburbs are just built for this purpose of urban warfare. So it would be a very difficult fight. We have gone in there before in limited ways in 2014, 2008, 2009, and it hasn't been easy. Since then, they've just had more time. They've had more money from Iran. They've had more practice. So certainly wouldn't be an easy thing to do. But I think one thing that's interesting or important to note about all of this is the resolve in Israeli society. You walk around here and you just see, unity, and you see everyone supporting the army and supporting what needs to be done in order to achieve those aims. I'm sure entire plane loads of Israelis flying home from around the world. Organizations such as Achim Leneshek, Brothers in Arms, who a few months ago were responsible for organizing many of the protests against the legal reforms, have now used their organization and their logistical abilities to raise money for families, to collect goods that they need, basic supplies, to collect things for soldiers that are needed. So there's certainly this resolve in Israeli society, and everyone is very resolute that whatever needs to be done, that's what we'll have to do, even though it will come at a high cost.
Ben, talk us through this underground city that Hamas appears to have built, or a city under a city that control and command comes from.
Well, that's exactly what it is. There's this well-known saying that we use our rockets and our missiles to protect our civilians who were put in bunkers underground, and they're using their women and their children above ground to protect their rockets underground. And it really is that way. You can see how hard we've been hitting Gaza now, and we've certainly killed a lot of terrorists, but a lot of them are just deep far underground, while their population is up on top. And you've seen from previous rounds of hostilities that we've had with Gaza in 2021, for example, we took out a lot of their underground tunnel network with bombs that detonate deep underground. But they've had a long time to invest in it, and they've had a long time to invest in building safe havens for their own people, while for their own terrorists and their commanders, while their population is underground. Tactically, it makes challenges because one of the concepts of ground warfare is when you go house by house and street by street, you want to clear the area behind you, so you know that there's no longer any threat behind you, and you want to keep moving forward. Tunnels negate that ability, because you might clear an area, but someone might come from another area underground and then pop up behind you on your flank. So it makes it tactically very much more difficult. The IDF is aware of that and has been training for that and has means for that, and we know how to contend with that. So it's difficult, but it's something that we know what to do about.
Walk us through some of the numbers, and then we're going to turn our attention to the north, to Lebanon and to Syria. But walk us through casualties, injured, number of rockets fired. What do we know so far about the attacks that have taken place?
Well, so far, the official number of people killed as of last Saturday is over 1,300. That number is rising, not because a lot of people are being killed since Saturday, but just because it's taken so long to get to those communities where the terrorists were, make sure they're absolutely clear of terrorist presence, that no one's been hiding anywhere. undo booby traps that some of the terrorists left behind, including on bodies, and then gather those corpses and go through the work of identifying them and notifying the families before we release the details publicly. So that's why those numbers are rising. And unfortunately, it doesn't seem that it's going to stop anytime soon. In terms of IDF casualties, the official number at the moment is 286. 286 soldiers have been killed since Saturday. Most of those on Saturday itself, and since then in skirmishes, or whatever they're called in English, down in the south, and also a few in the north. So far, the army has notified 126 families that they have family members who are being held in Gaza, whether dead or alive. In terms of rocket attacks, the number's in the thousands. In terms of attacks of ours in Gaza, it reaches, I think, in the low thousands already. Yeah.
So if I can just clarify one thing, you say 126 families have been notified. Does that mean 126 people are confirmed as hostages? Or if entire families were taken, could that number in fact be higher than 126?
It could be a little bit higher. Yeah.
There certainly are South Africans who are missing. There are South Africans who are injured. There's South Africans who are dead. And we certainly, I think on behalf of our entire community, pray for their early release for those who are being held. But Ben, let's turn to the north. Let's turn to the borders of Syria and the borders of Lebanon, and tell us exactly what we should know.
Okay. I mean, in a tactical sense, I mentioned we've had a few attacks over the past week from Lebanon and from Syria, mostly from Lebanese territory. And it's been anti-tank fire, some rocket fire, mortars, and some aerial incursions by drones. Each one of those attacks has either been responded to or repelled by the IDF. The latest was today. There were quite a few exchanges of fire over the border with Lebanon. I think it's no secret that Hezbollah is a massive military force in the region, the bigger army and bigger capabilities than many states, NATO member states. It's also very much a part of the Lebanese political system. It's a political party. It sits in the parliament. It sits in the cabinet. And you have to raise a question: where does Hezbollah start and Lebanon end? It's sort of like the adage where you say, okay, if I cut off my hand, I'm here and my hand's there. I cut off my arm, I'm here, my arm's there. But at what point do you then move over there? And Lebanon is such an integral part now, and an integrated part of the Lebanese political system, that in some ways it's hard to distinguish between Hezbollah and Lebanon as a state. I think, and we all know, and I think the world knows, that if the conflict were to expand to the northern arena, it would be catastrophic. Primarily for Lebanon and Lebanese civilians, because of the way that Hezbollah has embedded itself within Lebanon, and because of the way that Hezbollah has exploited and kidnapped state resources, electricity, water, and so on. Certainly, the world has made it very clear, as has Israel, that no one should think of joining this fight. I think President Biden has made that pretty clear as well, both in words and in deeds. We're receiving a second carrier group into the Eastern Med this week. Britain has sent over military forces, improving its posture in the region. And we've enjoyed diplomatic support from Western allies around the world who've made it very clear that no one wants to see this conflict being bigger than it already is.
Ben, I know you've got a very busy evening ahead of you. This isn't your day job or your general day job, but I presume you've been called back in order to do it. And we're just enormously grateful the fact that you've taken time this evening to speak to all of us and to update us. Our prayers are with you. Go in peace, come back in peace, and we look forward to hosting you again.
Thank you. And I just want to note that even while all this craziness is going on, Israelis see the support they're receiving from Jewish communities around the world, and it means a lot to them, and everyone really appreciates it. So thank you all for your support, and look after yourselves.
Thank you. Chat to you soon, Ben. Which brings us to Avi Mayer. Avi, thank you. You are the editor of the Jerusalem Post, and Arthur Lenk, you are former Israeli ambassador to South Africa. I know you all have a lot happening at the moment. Avi, covering a war is not an easy thing. Take us through what we should know about this war, the conflict, how it began.
Well, I think your previous speaker gave a pretty comprehensive overview of much of that. I can tell you from my perspective, this was the morning of Simchat Torah, the holiday that was just last weekend, the end of the Jewish holiday season. I had intended to spend the day with friends and at synagogue, at shul in the morning, and I was awakened from my slumber by a rocket siren. I wasn't quite sure that that's what it was. It was hard to believe that there was actually a rocket siren happening that morning, but in fact it was. And from that moment on, my day obviously changed entirely. I did go to shul. We had anticipated many dozens of people. We had barely a minyan, I think it was 11 people who came, 12. And every few moments I had to jump out to look at my phone to make sure I was monitoring the situation, giving instructions to my team. We had to go down to the bomb shelter at several different occasions during that morning service. And then as soon as I got home around 11 or 12, that was basically the end of Shabbat. I spent the entire rest of the day monitoring the situation, making sure that we were keeping our audience updated throughout the day, particularly when it came to rocket attacks. At the time, we didn't quite understand the scope of what was happening. I remember the first update we sent out referred to 22 dead, which at the time seemed unimaginably high. And then gradually, as the day went on, the numbers kept mounting. And by the time Shabbat was over, the number had, I think, already reached 250, and it seemed unfathomable. And now the fact that we know of, as your previous speaker said, 1,300 people, and that number might increase further, it's not something that we can easily grasp. This is a number that means 1,300 shattered families. It means 1,300 circles of friends that'll never be the same. And this is something that has affected the entire country in so many different ways. And that was something we only had some indication of that very day, that last Saturday. It was so terrible.
So in fact, Yuval Harari has said in the beginning, people spoke in one way about a terrorist attack, but soon it became evident that this was almost like a pogrom. I think he described it as the Einsatzgruppen going from village to village to murder the Jews. That's what happened in the south of Israel. Why? What sparks something like that?
You know, it's interesting. I've thought about that a lot, and I've been asked about it a lot in recent days. And I think that many of us had deluded ourselves about Hamas. You know, we all knew that Hamas has a genocidal charter that states explicitly that its goal is the destruction of Israel and the murder of all Jews. It says so very, very clearly. There's no denying it. But I think for many years, people thought of Hamas as, yes, a terrorist organization, but one that could be reasoned with, or one that could be pragmatic, or one that really only cared about the welfare of its people. And so the policy line that had really guided the Israeli government in recent years has been one of economic development for Gaza, letting in Palestinian laborers from Gaza, enabling them to work within Israel, allowing goods to pass through, and allowing various different individuals and organizations to pass through the border crossings. Because again, the idea was Hamas was basically pragmatic. Yes, it wanted Israel's destruction, but right now it was more concerned with governing this place called the Gaza Strip, and that governance would moderate it. And then what we saw last Saturday was, I think, a terrible, horrible, awful wake-up call that Hamas has never changed its stripes, that it's always been a genocidal terrorist organization that wants nothing more than to murder every single Jew on earth. And so I agree entirely with what was said. This was a pogrom. We didn't think pogroms were possible anymore, but this was the worst massacre of Jews since the Holocaust. And the fact that it took place within Israel proper, that they were able to go through relatively easily by just bursting through the fence at various points and driving through with pickup trucks and motorcycles and dune buggies, is just what compounds this shock and this horror. So I think this is certainly a wake-up call. There are those who are now saying that Hamas is not only ISIS-like, but is worse than ISIS in many respects. And I think that that is a realization that many people are coming to, and certainly that Israel will have to contend with in the days and weeks ahead.
Is there any indication how big this attack was? I've seen reports that over 1,000 Hamas terrorists were killed within Israel, but do we know how many people actually crossed the border?
There have been various different estimates. I've actually heard that 1,500 Hamas terrorists were killed within Israel. Their bodies were recovered. And we know, obviously, that quite a few made it back holding hostages or otherwise. So it's likely that the number was closer to 2,000 or perhaps even higher than that. This was a very well thought out, well coordinated attack that was clearly a very long time in the making. We have indications based on the Wall Street Journal's reporting and others that Iran was involved not only in planning this attack, but ultimately greenlighting it, giving it the approval to go ahead. That would not surprise me at all. Of course, Hamas is funded, supported in various different ways by Iran, as certainly is Hezbollah on Israel's northern border. But this was a devastating military and intelligence failure for Israel. There will certainly have to be a reckoning at some point in the future. We don't know exactly what that will look like, but there will obviously be a commission of inquiry, probably similar to what happened after the Yom Kippur War. And we'll have to see. We'll have to see what the ramifications are of this horrible, horrible attack last weekend. I imagine it will reverberate for many, many years to come.
If we can broaden the discussion and bring in Arthur. Arthur, you've been an Israeli diplomat in a number of countries, some very interesting countries, probably the most interesting maybe being South Africa. And it's fantastic to see you again. But Arthur, talk to us about Iran. How does Iran play into the region, number one? And number two, is this precipitated by the potential peace between Israel and Saudi Arabia, the normalization of those arrangements? Was this an attempt to scupper that? Let's unmute you.
Hey, Howard, it's meaningful for me to be with you and with literally over 1,000 friends from my time in South Africa. It's hard to believe that 6 years have gone by since then. And I want to note, someone mentioned, or the representative from IDF spokesman mentioned that we're following what's happening in Jewish communities around the world. I saw that there were prayer services in South Africa. There were flags, the Israeli flags on Johannesburg buildings. Today, there was a memorial in Johannesburg. I heard in the car earlier today, Aaron Milner's voice message regarding the I don't know, I was going to be diplomatic and say problematic, but I think that that's too much of an understatement for this audience of the comments of President Ramaphosa. And I know about the deep connection. I lived the deep connection between the Jewish community in South Africa and Israel for 4 years of my life. And so it's meaningful to be with you guys tonight. To your question about Iran, there's no news here per se, in that Iran is the only country in the world that literally calls for the destruction of another member of the United Nations. There's no other example. Countries are at war, countries are in conflict, countries disagree, but it's clear that Iran works with its proxies and partners, certainly Hamas, certainly Hezbollah, to kill Jews, to kill Israelis, to destroy us. And I think it's clear to everybody that the war that we're in, that began last week, Iran's a part of that. And it sees itself that way. I think we see it that way. And it'll be interesting to see how that all develops when we defeat Hamas and respond as strongly as we're beginning to respond.
And within the world geopolitics, talk to us about India, about China, about Russia, about the European Union, United States. Who's been supportive?
Okay, so I understand that you start with BRICS countries because you're South African, Howard. But let's even zoom out further than that. The vast majority of countries in the world understand what happened in Israel, identify with what happened in Israel, starting with the world's greatest superpower, our best friend, the United States. The speech that President Biden gave last week I don't think I've ever heard an American president speak that way. And I was at Prime Minister Rabin's funeral and heard President Clinton. President Biden spoke in a unique way. He's spoken to Prime Minister Netanyahu 5 times over the last week. The actions that the U.S. government has taken, but it's not just the U.S. The UK Prime Minister Sunak said the people who support Hamas are fully responsible for this appalling attack. They are not militants. They're not freedom fighters. They're terrorists, right? Who would expect in normal times the British Prime Minister to talk that way? Friends of mine from Norway talk about how Norway changed their legislation regarding Hamas. It was inconceivable for a country like Norway to talk that way. Germany, my friends in Azerbaijan were just like buildings were lit up in Johannesburg. They were lit up in Baku, Azerbaijan, in a Muslim country bordering Iran. The South African government, whether it's the Department of International Relations and Cooperation and the ANC, are stark exceptions in the international community. And perhaps, if you want, we can talk about that a bit more.
We'll talk about that a little later. I wanted to turn to Avi, because Avi, I think a lot of people are asking the question, how could this have happened? This is one of the most powerful armies in the world. It's got one of the best intelligence services in the world. It's got a proper secured border with monitoring on. How on earth could this conceivably have happened? And why did it take the army so long to get to the kibbutzim and the villages in order to protect them?
Well, Hamas caught Israel with its pants down. I think that's quite obvious. This was not a threat that many had conceived of, even though in retrospect, it seems fairly obvious and almost elementary that they could do such a thing. I think the IDF had been training for different kinds of threats, different forms of threats in the form of rockets. Of course, you have the Iron Dome system, which has been marvelously successful, even over the past week, in neutralizing many of the threats that have come Israel's way. Other forms of Hamas terror and warfare, but the notion that they could simply burst through the fence and drive through it and massacre hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of innocent people was something that I think many people never conceived of as possible. And so when I said earlier that there will have to be a reckoning, I think that that's absolutely true. It'll have to happen within the military as well. It's very clear that Israel's military doctrine needs a significant update. If this is something that Hamas is capable of, God only knows what other organizations, including Hezbollah, which is much more sophisticated, which has a much more extensive arsenal, 150,000 rockets and sophisticated missiles, would be capable of. And so I think that that's a large part of why we saw what we did last weekend. There are many questions that need answers, and we certainly don't have those yet. We're very much in the thick of it, and it's far from being over. In fact, in many respects, it's only just getting started. In terms of why it took the IDF so long to get there, I think that's also something that will have to be investigated. Again, it's important to note that this took place on Simchat Torah, a holiday when a lot of soldiers were on leave. The bases were much more sparsely populated than they would have been at other times of year, which of course Hamas knew about, which is why one of the reasons why it targeted Israel on that day. And that too will need to be investigated. We'll have to ask a lot of questions about how this was permitted to happen. Already there are indications from military leadership that they do take responsibility, and that investigations will be undertaken. But this is something that the Israeli public will demand in the long term, to see exactly how this could have gone so very, very wrong and how to correct it for the future.
We will return to some of the questioning with Arthur, but Avi, I know you've got a time constraint, so I want to slip in a few questions for you, if you may. I'm going to ask you to try predict the future. Will ultimately the current government, when the war is over, fall or change? That's question number one. And number two, how will the Israeli public react when all of this is over?
Well, I'll answer your second question first, which is that the Israeli public will rally. We always do, no matter how difficult the challenges may be. We always emerge stronger than we were beforehand. It may be a changed society, it may be a scarred society, it may be a traumatized society, but it will be a stronger society, and of that I am confident. In terms of whether the government will survive, I'll tell you frankly, I don't think it can. Certainly not in its current constellation. We already have an emergency unity government in Israel to make it through this war, which we don't obviously know how long it will take. It could be a matter of days, weeks, perhaps even months, I've heard. But even when that concludes and the war cabinet is dismantled, I can't imagine that the government will look the same afterwards. Whether Prime Minister Netanyahu remains Prime Minister, I think, is also a question that deserves to be asked. There are many in Israeli society who hold him personally responsible for this. Over 90% of Israelis believe that the government does need to take responsibility for this massive failure. There are many who have called on him to step down. It seems unlikely that he would do that in the middle of the war, but I don't know whether he'll have much of a choice afterwards. Again, we'll have to see what the Commission of Inquiry decides, but we know that, for example, the Commission of Inquiry that followed the Yom Kippur War did indeed bring about Golda Meir's resignation. And I wouldn't be surprised if we saw something similar in the aftermath of this horrific campaign.
So they say, yeah, only prophets and fools predict the future. And I know you're not a prophet, but do you think the presence of now 2 large American aircraft carriers in the region is going to be sufficient to make sure that Hezbollah does not join the war?
Well, I certainly hope so. I think a northern front would be an extremely perilous prospect for Israel. Again, Hezbollah has capabilities that Hamas can only dream of. And of course, it is even more closely tied to Iran than Hamas is, although Hamas, of course, does receive Iranian backing and arms and so on and so forth. Hezbollah is an arm of Iran in Lebanon. There's no one who denies that. They say so very openly. And so I certainly hope that those carrier groups are enough to deter Iran, that the bellicose rhetoric that American leaders from President Biden on down have engaged in, cautioning Iran and other actors not to become involved, will ultimately be effective. But we can only wait and see.
I think Anthony is asking the question, did you refer to 150,000 rockets in Hezbollah's arsenal?
That's correct, yeah.
And what happens if they fire them?
Chaos. It would be unlike anything Israel has ever contended with before, because again, while we do have the Iron Dome, the Arrow system, Patriot, there are various air defense systems that exist within Israel. If they were to fire even a fraction of those rockets and missiles all at once, they could easily overwhelm those systems and ensure that at least some of the rockets and missiles were able to get through and perhaps even hit Israeli population centers. When we talk about missiles, we're talking about armaments that have a very significant range. There are those who suggest that they could go as far as Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, Dimona, from Lebanon, which would be quite far indeed. The leader of Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah, has said that he can hit any point in Israel, and he may actually be right about that. So it's a very significant threat, one that is to be taken extremely seriously. And so we hope that both a combination of the American steps and rhetoric and also Israel's acts to deter Hezbollah from becoming involved will ultimately prove effective.
If we can sneak in one question before you go, talk to us about Syria. There have been a few attacks from Syria, not many, but there have been rockets from Syria. Is that border going to become hot, or do you think it will remain cool?
I think it's unlikely that Syria would become involved qua Syria, but we do know that Syria serves as a way station for arms coming from Iran to Hezbollah in Lebanon. And so there have been several airstrikes recently, including just a few days ago, at various air bases and airports in Syria that have been used by the Iranian government to transfer those arms to Hezbollah. There are many who have attributed those airstrikes to Israel. Of course, we can't confirm or deny whether that's the case. But I think in that respect, Syria is very much a part of this, but it's unlikely that the Syrian government will become involved in any direct warfare with Israel.
Avi, I don't know what your time constraints are like. I know you do have them. If you need to go, please hop off. But thank you so much for joining us. And I certainly hope you will join us again and we can continue this discussion.
Thank you very, very much.
Arthur, before we go to Yael and Oren, who've got the most harrowing story to tell us, I want to sneak in a question to you. When you were South African, Israeli ambassador to South Africa, you used to always use the phrase, South Africa is full of noise. Now, Robbie Brosen always says South Africa is full of noise, but if you listen carefully, you can hear the music under the noise. But at the moment, it seems like there's noise under the noise. You followed what the ANC did yesterday. The entire ANC, NEC arrived in Kafirs, rather than expressing any condolences, rather than speaking about sympathy for the Jewish community, for the South African Jews who've been killed, injured, and potentially taken hostage. There was nothing. There was unequivocal support for Palestine. You spent 4 years in this country. Does any of that surprise you?
Disappoint? Sure. Surprise? No. But let me tell you good news that got me in trouble in South Africa. When I was there, mainly with our brothers and sisters, it got me in trouble. But I think I have to say that I find some solace in what I'm about to say, because I'm gonna say the same thing again. South Africa doesn't matter. It's just not as important. It doesn't have the symbol. It doesn't have the halo that it used to have. I wish it did. I wish that South Africa could really share with Israelis and Palestinians and Iranians and Lebanese the lessons of Ubuntu and of transformation, and be a constructive player both domestically and internationally. It would have value in that parallel universe. But in this world, the international community has been following South Africa in recent years. And it's not the topic of tonight's discussion, but South Africa has issues that you know better than I. And it has challenges internationally that you know better than I. And its relationship with the United States and with Europe and with much of the world is problematic. And its voice here in the Middle East doesn't exist. And it's a shame, but I think it's true. And it's not an insult to anybody, and I'm not saying anything bad about South Africa. It's a place that I think that a lot of the people on this know that I love and is in my heart. But the good news for Israel, the really good news is South Africa, other than you folks, and you folks are high on the list, but there's nothing else of really primary strategic, vital needs for Israel in 2023. And so I wish that the ANC was less hypocritical. I wish that other voices were able to come through in South Africa. I wish that they engaged in any constructive way with Israel and with the Jewish community, but that doesn't happen. But I think that the lesson for all of us is not to throw up our hands. I think that there's a lot to do. I think in my last interview that I did with you, Howie, before I left South Africa in 2017, one of the conclusions that you and I said together is that there's a massive need and importance of continuing to engage in South Africa and reach out to people in government at all levels, to reach out to South Africans of all colors and backgrounds and political views, and lead. The Jewish community shouldn't be hiding in Glen Hazel or wherever else. But it's no accident that, Howard, you were a leader in the first elections in South Africa, and have a history and receipts to show yourself as a patriotic central South African. But we need to get out of our neighborhoods, out of the rich suburbs, and engage and show up at ANC meetings and ask questions and write to newspapers and to write editorials and to lobby the things that are most important to us as Jews, whether it's Israel or anything else. So I think that that's my answer to what to do about South Africa, or whether I was surprised, or how to go forward.
So Arthur, there are a lot of questions that have come in for you, and I want to pose them to you, but we do want to speak to Yael and Oren. So I'm going to ask you to turn off your camera. We will be back with you shortly. And Yael and Oren, just before we do, the question that so many people are asking is how can they help? And we've got an idea for them, because Michael Kransdorf, you with the JNF, Keren Kayemet L'Israel, there are things that South Africans can do now to help. Tell us about your project. And then after we've shown this very short video and about your project and given people the opportunity to donate, we're going to talk to Yael and Oren, and they're going to tell us their remarkable, harrowing story. But Mike, how can people help?
Right, thanks, Howard, for the opportunity. As you mentioned, I'm with the JNF, and the South African Jewish community through the JNF has for many years been supporting the people of the South. After the horrendous attack on Saturday morning, people from the communities around the South asked us through Keren Kayemet Israel how we could help. And one idea was to help take children from the South who've been traumatized really badly by the pogrom that they basically faced on Simchat Torah to the South Africa Forest. At the South Africa Forest, we have a campsite which was paid for by the South African Jewish community with cabins. And we're providing them with shelter, we're providing them with respite and with counseling so that they're able to overcome some of the trauma that they've been experiencing. It's not only Saturday's trauma, but these people have been experiencing living under the threat of bombs for many years, and it's taken a terrible toll on the children of the South. And this was a small way that we were able to help a few hundred children from the South and relieve some of the suffering that they've been enduring over the last week.
So the idea is, we've heard, for example, that 20,000 people, more than 20,000 people have been evacuated from the South. Many of them have nowhere to go. So you're taking hundreds of these kids, you're putting them in a campsite, you're giving them counseling, you're making sure that they're fed, and you're making sure that they're clothed, and you're making sure that they've got linen and somewhere safe to sleep. It's a remarkable project. I'm going to ask Danny just to show us a very quick video, and then we're going to give people an opportunity to donate by both SnapScan, as well as we'll do a poll on Zoom that will allow people, if they want to be contacted, so they can make a donation to be able to do so. So Yael and Oren, I'm sorry we're keeping you waiting, but let's try give people something practical that they can actually physically do to help. Danny, won't you roll our video, please?
אנחנו כבר חיים, זה כבר המון שנים, כל המצב הזה. אבל הפעם המציאות הייתה יותר קשה. המחבלים ממש נכנסו, הרגו אנשים.
מתחילות כל מיני שמועות מה קורה ביישובים אחרים, וזה מתקדם לעבר היישוב שלנו. כל פעם אתה שומע על יישוב שיותר קרוב אלינו.
התגייסנו כולנו, וגם פה במרכז שדה החינוכי לוי של קק"ל, ואנחנו מארחים משפחות מעוטף עזה, בירוק הזה ובשקט הזה, הפסטורלי, נחים, ונהנים גם מהפעילויות החינוכיות שלנו.
קרן הקיימת לישראל, כמו כל עם ישראל, התגייס לעזור ליישובים מהדרום בשעתם הקשה. אנו פה מדריכי הקק"ל מפעילים את הילדים בהפעלות ובתכנים של ארץ ישראל ואהבת ישראל.
ועכשיו שאנחנו פה בצפון, אנחנו מרגישים יותר בטוחים, יותר רגועים. לשכוח מהדברים האלה כמה בקצת שאפשר, ולהיות פה רגע עם הילדים, בשקט ושלווה, הילדים רצים, משחקים, עסוקים בלהיות ילדים. כמובן שאני רוצה להגיד תודה לקק"ל שערכו אותנו פה, וגם לידידינו שבדרום אפריקה שעזרו לנו ותמכו בנו. באמת זה משהו שלא מובן מאליו. באמת שנחזור ונהיה מאוחדים וננצח במלחמה הזאת כמה שיותר.
So there are many worthy causes. This is one of many, but we do want to give people the opportunity now. If you'd like to make a donation, what we're going to do, we're going to be putting on the screen. And for those people who have a cell phone, you can take out your cell phone, you can open your camera, you can point it at that snap scan, and you'll see it says snap scan. You just click on it. You'll be able to make a donation through to the JNF. At the same time, if you'd like to take a picture of the banking details to make a transfer, you're able to do that. So for those people, we'll give you a minute who want to point their cameras at the screen, you'll be able to do so. And after that, if you'd like us to send you a mail with all of the details to allow you to make a donation to the JNF, or I see my friend Gadi has just said, what about Karen Hayasod as well? We're happy to do and provide people with as many opportunities to do good as possible. There's so many people who just want to do good and aren't entirely sure how to do it. So please take out your cameras, point them at the screen, take the snap scan, the banking details as well. Please just take a picture of that so you can make a donation. For those people who are watching on Zoom, let's pull up a poll. If you're watching on Zoom and you'd like to make a donation, you can just tell us yes on this or yes, of course, and we will in fact make sure that we send you all of the details, and we'll give you some options, JNF or in fact Karen Ayasod or anyone else, and we'll make sure that every single cent donated gets to the recipients. There's no admin fees, there's no costs involved in any of this. We want to make sure that every single person who's suffered at the hands of the most grotesque human rights violation of our generation gets an opportunity to do this. I see, for example, we've got more than 144 people already who've committed to, just on the poll, to make donations. That number's going up all the time. We're now 167, 168. For those people who are watching on Facebook and who are watching us on YouTube, obviously you don't have the poll in front of you. You can't use that facility, but you definitely can use the SnapScan facility. And we will, of course, show you this information again a little later on in the show as well. But we're going to allow you the opportunity to make a donation through SnapScan, or taking a photograph of the banking details, or telling us that you would like us, please, to send you the details, and you'll be able to make a donation to Karen Hayasod or to this village in the forest that will allow kids to be able to get therapy and somewhere to do. So we're going to stop that in about another 20-30 seconds. So if you would like us, and you're watching on Zoom, if you would like us to send you information of where to make a donation, please feel free to do so now. More than 200 people have already pledged just on the poll, and we'll keep that open for about another 10 seconds. I see the numbers are still going up. We're now 207 people. But of course, there are thousands and thousands of people watching us this evening on YouTube and Zoom. By the way, if you are watching us on YouTube, please click the like button. Please also click the subscribe button on YouTube. That allows us to communicate with you and tell you when more webinars are coming up. We're sitting on 211 people who've asked to be contacted to make a donation. I'm going to close this now. There will be another opportunity at the end to make a donation. We're also in the chat section putting the donation details there. So please feel free to copy that out. But I want, Danny, if you can just stop that share, to turn to Yael and Oren. A huge thank you to you guys for joining us this evening. You've been through one hell of a week. Welcome, guys. Tell us a little about who you are.
Well, today we're Yael and Oren, who survived the massacre in the music festival. A week ago, we were Yael, a physiotherapist, a Pilates instructor. I would probably be sitting here and explaining how exercise is medicine. We should promote exercise everywhere. And Oren is a logistical manager in a supermarket chain. And we have two kids, young kids. Our daughter, Daria, is 4 years old, and our son, Guy, is 6.5 years old. He just started his first year in school. And you know, a week ago, it was just the end of the holidays. We were just about to go back into a routine.
So clearly, tell us about this festival in the desert. It's 3 kilometers off the Gaza border. It's in the desert. It's in nature. Tell us a little about the festival.
Okay, so in general, these kinds of music festivals is something, it's a global universe festival that people come a lot of times all around the world, and Israel has really good musicians actually in this field. And you know, it's a very nice and loving party that's always in the field because it's people who enjoy nature, and a very global environment of being good to one another, and everybody in this field are friends together. That's like very important part of the music community. And the most exciting part in these music festivals is sunrise, right? Because you come like through this transition of coming into a field that you can't really see. And it's very colorful and it's beautiful, right? It's like a fairy tale supposed to feel and look like. They do like costumes and everything. And if you've seen videos from the festival, you could see that there's like nice lightning and very calming atmosphere, calming and, you know, very hype and dancing. It's therapy, movement therapy. And then the transition of sunrise is the transition from like not seeing anything to having the sun come and suddenly seeing the field you've been dancing with people for hours, and you suddenly see their faces, and it's a very loving community. It feels like everybody's there for one another. And that terrible Saturday last week, Friday till Saturday, depends how you look at it. It was just another Saturday, and it didn't look too weird to us to go to the music festival 4 kilometers from the border. I mean, you know, in very other events, we go to exactly that region to travel with our kids. It's a region that's very known for its beautiful blooming of kalaniot in the winter. There's a huge festival in that area called the Ramadan that every winter for 4 weeks, people come, thousands of people come every day to that area. I mean, this is part of Israel, right? It's 4 kilometers from the border, but you're like, this is part of Israel. And we've been through so many years of knowing that part of Israel is being, you know, dropped on.
Dropped on by rockets.
Yeah, dropped by rockets. Okay, we know, we're like alarms is we're kind of cynical about that, right? So we're from Herzliya, we don't live down south, but knowing that sometimes there's rockets that come on the south, that's like something common to our culture for the last decade. And each time we get the results of having our strong army or strong technological abilities that prevent casualties or terrible casualties, there's like drifts of casualties, so we can, you know, you get used to it. It's part of living here. And then at that morning, 6:30 in the morning, the music stops. So it's like, and it's the peak of sunrise. And the music stopping in a music festival like this, it's like, you know, like the radio would suddenly stop. That's really weird, right? I mean, that's something, you're sure that something wrong. And the music stops and they don't put the music on. They say, guys, there's missiles coming here. There's only 15 seconds to evacuate. Let's go clear the party, go into your cars, etc. And, you know, you said several times that I can't ignore this. You said Yael and Oren and their heroic story. And it's really not an heroic story, because we didn't come to protect our land or to, you know, save lives. We came to celebrate our holiday. I mean, we're not soldiers. We're not, it's like we're not part of this game, you know? And suddenly, when this starts, we didn't really understand how severe, I mean, what we're about to witness, what we're about to live. And it takes like about 20 minutes to understand that this situation is really serious and that we are crowded by terrorists. And they're coming, and we're outnumbered in our own land. Really outnumbered. We're like people, you know, we're 3,000 people and they're hundreds, but they are all gunned up and we have nothing on us. I mean, all we had are 30 policemen that came because this party was authorized in their personal weapon. Now, could you imagine with 30 weapons of a personal weapon against this army that suddenly came down from Gaza? And they were smart. They used the fact that we didn't panic in the beginning. They knew how to come from both ways and crowd us into a situation that they just circled us around and got us running from place to place while they just drove and slaughtered. There were units driving and shooting everybody around, and there were units that were looking for people hiding and shooting while you were hiding. And after like 2 hours of this mess of, we lost our phones really in the beginning. Luckily for us, I think that helped us stay alive, even though, again, it's only luck. It's not that we had any smart decision or heroic things. We were just really lucky to come back to our kids and tell our story from here and not sit in Gaza being photographed by terrorists. And after like 2 hours of this massive running and massacring around us, we see a tank. And I so excited. I was in the army like a decade ago, an armor instructor. I taught people about tanks, and I run to the tank and I feel like, oh my God, I've saved. The army is finally here. It's the first time I see something coming from the army. And I run into the tank and you realize there's nobody there, nobody's coming. And this is a really serious situation. We got out of it eventually. We ran after we hid in a tunnel. We were shotted out at the tunnel. We have very small wounds and injuries in our body, but terrible injuries to our hearts, of hours of fear and running and feeling that nobody's ever going to come. And we just kept on, after being shot at, we kept on running until we hijacked. We went with people into their cars. You couldn't know who's good, who's bad, who's part of us, who are they. We had one civilian come and save us and take us a few kilometers further up, and then a reporter named Rami Shani from Israel, taking us another block to safety. And from there, policemen taking us up to Ofakim. And we just kept on going up north. And we were lucky, but a lot weren't. It was really a terrible situation to see.
You say a lot weren't. Over 260 partygoers were massacred. Why do you think you survived? What did you do differently maybe to the other people?
Well, I don't know. My shrink would say this is like a magic fuck right now to start and think why I survived, because I could have chosen. You never know. First of all, we were really, really lucky. We were really lucky. We left, we didn't leave first, so we didn't enter surprised, and we weren't staying in the last, so we weren't kidnapped. Our timing of the situation was good. We ran among a lot of people. And I kept on running and saying, we're lucky, we're fit, we're lucky, we're fit. We'll run. We closed some of our senses. I didn't look at anything. I didn't see them at any point. I just trusted my husband to run and me to keep up. I didn't look at my phone. I had no idea what's going on. It was just, it's amazing because I teach people about how the human body reacts. Okay, so I'm really traumatized, and I all the time, all the thing I can notice is the human reaction to things. because I'm not at a state to be in any contact with my emotions. But like in this situation, you're running and you understand the sympathetic nervous system of flight, fight, or freeze. I mean, I teach this. I don't know where the audience, your business people, your medical people, but where in the medicine world, we talk a lot about this reaction and how the whole body shifts to the situation. And I knew that if I'd look back, okay, I don't see scary movies. I don't see things that that people look at for entertainment. I can't watch. I would cuddle up in my husband's shoulders and say, tell me when it's over. And that's also what I did here. I said, tell me when it's over. I'm not going to look until all my nervous system feels that if I'll look, I won't freeze. It was pure evil. You could feel it. You don't have to see it in order to feel how evil is when it walks next to you. I don't know how I got to all this thoughts out of you asking me how we survived. We just survived. We were just lucky. Some were lucky, some weren't.
Did you know some of the people who weren't lucky?
Well, this is very interesting timing with the chat because I'm less from the trans community. I joined, but my husband, it's his world, more of entertainment. So he knows many. He is
I know
going to funerals now every day.
Oren, how many people have you lost?
There is a lot of maybe 20 people that I know them, but not a good friend. But some DJs that died and killed. Some people I know from the parties that all of the year I go, and some friends today. I been go to say goodbye to a friend that I work with him a few years. A lot of people, and there is some that missing, that kidnap, or just even there is after 8 days, 9 days. No, they don't find them. Maybe they burned or something terrible. That looking the area in the party area and searching, and they're still missing.
I mean, we've seen these horrendous videos and photographs of burnt bodies, of people hiding in toilets and just being mowed down. The toilets being shot up, of people in little shelters just having hand grenades thrown at them. The images are just heartbreaking and devastating. It's been 8 days. How do you cope?
Well, first of all, everybody has their own mechanism, I assume. We're home. We have help from family and friends to take care of our kids. It's kind of even the elementary thing of taking care of your kids is not trivial. Getting them eating, getting yourself eating, getting yourself the care you need in order to live. Again, the body wounds are very, very easy and they heal really easily. But the sense of having your heart broken, really, the feeling of what a broken heart is it's devastating. And everybody says it will be better. I'm sure it will be better. Our nervous system gets adjusted to everything. I think it's really sad that we'll get used to, okay, this is just another part of history. will be part of history, and that this is normal in our culture to kill people this way because of territory wars. You know, I'm a mother. This is really weird to me. I'm not a politician. I'm a therapist. I work with people on rehabilitating their body, and I work with kids on sharing toys. So for me, like, suddenly being part of this event is also a really big wake-up call that you're part of it, even if you're not gay, you know, even if you don't think you're part of it. You're an Israeli, you're a Jew. They just hate you. I mean, that's an amazing understanding to me. That's life-changing.
I think maybe one of the most enduring images from the entire event was the image of Noah being kidnapped, being taken on the motorbike, her boyfriend being taken next to her, and it was her 24th birthday this weekend. So we send love and positive thoughts for those people who've been to trans festivals in South Africa and around the world. There are many thousands of people who are watching this who could have been there. My niece is a DJ in Israel. She could have been there. It could have been absolutely anyone watching the show tonight. By the grace of God, you two are safe. You're with your children, you're with your family. But there are over 1,000 people tonight who are not, and maybe somewhere between 100 and 250 people who are captive in Gaza, terrified for their lives. Thank you for sharing your story with us this evening. It's so appreciative. There's so many people, I think, if they could, would just walk over and give you all a hug.
Thank you. Thank you for all you're doing.
And I'm going to just ask people who are busy watching us to send you a message in the chat now, so you can understand and feel the love that comes all the way from the bottom of South Africa. And people will reach out and express their love and respect and admiration for you guys, and just wish you strength in this impossibly difficult time.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thanks,
Howard, can I jump in for a second?
Yeah, of course, Arthur, yes.
Yeah, firstly, Yael and Oren, I want to give a hug. I'm crying, and I'm sure everybody else is. Those of us in Israel, we've been hearing stories of tragedy and of heroism, and I don't know, Yael, your words. I want to go to the gym tomorrow morning and be a better runner. That's for sure. But one thing I think for everybody to add, an interesting diplomatic decision that was made by the Israeli government, a pretty horrific one, and I'm going to tell the story through my daughter. I no longer work for the Israeli government, for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but my daughter Ilana, who was with us in South Africa quite a bit, is now the spokesperson of our embassy in Australia. And she was asked by her ambassador, and I'm just telling Ilana's story, but it's everybody's story, to prepare photographs of awful, horrific photographs. In fact, I've got some of them, and I'm not going to show them to this group. But her ambassador was about to go to a meeting with the Prime Minister of Australia, and felt that the Australian Prime Minister needed to know about the so many hundreds of kids at this festival, or in the kibbutzes, or in different places, who were butchered. And Ilana called me, my daughter, saying that it was impossible for her to go through and edit these photographs and put them together for the ambassador. And my comment to her was, you're not doing it for your ambassador. You're doing it for these families, and to bring honor and memory to who they were, and to be able to tell their stories. And again, Israeli television, and I don't know, my Facebook feed is totally filled 24/7 with disaster stories and heroic stories, and we've gone from this lack of believing to, a week later, this incredible resolve that exists in Israel right now. It's really, I don't know whether it's the steps of or what, but there's this incredible time of volunteerism, of charity, of civic involvement, of incredible anger, by the way. And Avi spoke earlier about anger towards the Israeli government, and he was right to describe that reckoning is going to have to come for all of this. But in Israel, nobody's doing that today. We're all we're together. And who would have imagined? Howie, you and I had lunch in Herzliya, I don't know, 2 months ago, and just talked about, and we're frustrated about how divided Israel was. And we will be again, but we're not this week. We're not this week.
In fact, Arthur, I spent a lot of time in Israel going to the pro-democracy protests, and I had an Israeli flag, which I brought back with me. And I took that flag today to the memorial service that Rowan put together in Johannesburg, because everything has a season. Yeah. We learned that from Kohelet. There's a time for peace and there's a time for war.
Yeah, I wonder if the next time we have these big rallies in Israel, and again, it's not this week and maybe not this month, but there are so many hundreds, there are over 100 Israelis that are in Gaza, and babies and senior citizens and families. And those families are already coming together and making noise, and their lives are never going to be the same. We're there for them, and we're going to be there with them on the streets of Israel before too long.
So Yael and Oren, please have a look at the chat section, and I'll send you a copy afterwards, but you will just see this unbelievable outpouring of love from people watching us tonight. And don't forget, we have got massive audiences in the United States and Canada and the UK and Israel and Australia and around the world, and people watch us in places like Bangkok and Panama. So you are receiving a great big virtual hug from the entire world. I'm going to ask Rowan to turn on his camera as well, and we're going to continue this discussion with Arthur, with Rowan and Michael. But Arthur, I interrupted you along the way because Avi needed to jump off, but we were talking about the great powers. You were talking about the support received from the United States and from the UK. Talk as well about the other BRICS countries as well, China, Russia. You said South Africa was the great exception, but in fact, India has been unbelievably supportive. Prime Minister Modi has been incredibly supportive.
Yeah, firstly, it's true, and I tried to talk a lot while I was in South Africa in my time in your country about India as a model of how one could be pro-Palestinian in many ways, but still have a constructive, positive, deep, for India, a strategic relationship with Israel, to be able to understand that. And that's certainly the case. And in India went through the whole series of terrorist attacks. We all remember the one on the Chabad house in Mumbai a number of years ago. And so there's a connection, there's a humanity between Israel and India that exists. Russia and China are in complicated places these days. I'm not sure anybody is looking to hear any love and support from Russia. We did from Ukraine very vocally. President Zelensky has been the greatest Jewish leader in the world that he is, in the way he's spoken since last weekend, and talking about how he wants to come to Israel to show unity. It's amazing. You think that the president of Ukraine would have a full enough plate these days. But those are the conversations that are going on throughout most of the world. And the foreign ministry, my former friend, my former colleagues, they're still my friends, and are working day and night telling these stories, because we know that we need international support, that the story internationally is already fulcruming, right? People got tired of hearing this story. How can you get tired in a few days of hearing these stories. But the CNN is moving on to other subjects and moving on to Israel's actions in Gaza, which were obvious that they're going to have to come, and they will, and we have no choice. And so that's why we're showing pictures, and that's why we're speaking out, and that's why we're explaining why ISIS equals Hamas. And that's the diplomacy that's going on right now, is understanding that the more that countries understand Israel's story, and that the threat on all of us, the more Israel's army is going to be able to work to keep us safe.
And Arthur, you mentioned things will change, and TV coverage will move, and there will be pictures of innocent Palestinian civilians who will die, because that's one of the consequences of war. And we have to be sensitive to that very
100%.
much as well. Every innocent civilian on both sides is an innocent civilian who never chose to be involved.
Or I'll say it even stronger, Howard. The Palestinian people are not our enemies. Hamas is our enemy. The Lebanese people are not our enemy. Hezbollah is our enemy. The Iranian people are not our enemy. They're the mullahs who are holding the people of Iran hostage are our enemy. Israel, if civilians get killed in Gaza, it means we screwed up. It means something didn't go right. It means that we need to fix something. We certainly don't celebrate it. We certainly don't go out and give candy and start dancing. That's the difference. It really is just a core difference between our values of life and Hamas and its supporters. How in the world do you sell? You and I were talking about it in a different context, Howard, that it's possible to be pro-Palestinian and a supporter of a two-state solution and wanting to see better days for Palestinians, and understand that what Hamas did was a massive war crime and a massive disaster for Palestinians. Now, why the South African government can't do that nuance and say that they continue to support the independence of Palestine, whether we agree or disagree, but at the same time to say that the ANC never acted in such a way during the struggle, that the ANC stopped actions against civilians and rejected this idea of terrorism, that there's an ethical difference between the history of South African freedom and the ANC and what Hamas is. It's just, it doesn't bring any on this cooperation doesn't bring any honor on South Africa and doesn't help Palestinians who strive for a better future.
In fact, someone posted on Facebook, he said, "Forgive me now for not hearing your calls for restraint if I never heard your condemnation of the barbarism that happened in the first instance." Rowan, I want to turn to you because you were quite vocal today about the South African government and Arthur's dilemma. Why can't you support an independent Palestinian state and yet recognize the barbarism, the terrorism, the brutality, the grotesqueness of this pogrom? Why can't our government actually do that?
Avi, that's the million-dollar question. The South African government has chosen to take sides, but they've chosen to take sides of evil, of the dictators, of the terrorists, and not only in this conflict, but around the world. And that is the question we have to ask ourselves. Why does this government continuously take the wrong side of history on our issue and on many other issues? And it is an absolute tragedy that South Africa, as Arthur said earlier, has completely removed itself from having any meaningful role to play between bringing peace between Israel and the Palestinians because of their own position, of their own hypocrisy. And it is extremely concerning to the South African Jewish community that we have a South African government that takes the side of evil. And it is something that we need to challenge. It is something that we need to stand up against. And we need to be the ones talking about morality, talking about right, talking about life. and speaking at every opportunity we can about these issues.
So, Rowan, I'm going to widen this discussion to Arthur and Michael as well. But while we do that, for those people who never had an opportunity to donate money, and once again, Michael, we're donating money so that kids who are refugees, who have basically been evacuated from their homes in the south, have a place to go, somewhere that they can get therapy, somewhere where they can get food, and somewhere where they can sleep, because they can't sleep in the bomb shelters in the kibbutzim where people have been massacred. We're collecting money for that tonight. We're going to put back onto the screen. If you would still like to make a donation, please feel free to take out your camera, use it, point your camera on your cell phone to the snap scan code that you should see on your computer right now, or take a photograph of the banking details. And in another minute or two, for those people who are busy watching us on Zoom this evening, we will once again put up a poll that would allow you to receive an email from us if you'd still like to make a donation and you haven't yet made a donation this evening. But Michael, talk to us about this. What else can people do? And Arthur, I'm going to come to you as well, because you had some ideas earlier, but I want practical advice for our community, for the millions of Christians in South Africa who support us, for the decent human beings who are out there who have seen evil, seen it in the face in 2023, and who want to do something. We need to be able to provide them with a voice. We need to give them courage to stand up. We need to give them an opportunity to use social media, to use their voices, to go, I think, as Arthur said, to political parties, to demand accountability and answers. Give us some practical advice. We're going to start with Michael. We're going to go on to Arthur. We're then going to come to Rowan, and then we're going to wrap up for this evening. It seems so frivolous that there's rugby this evening and that people still want to watch it. But ultimately, we're South Africans, we're deep patriotic South Africans who love Israel and love South Africa and are just appalled by our government. That's not going to stop us from supporting the Springboks in France this evening. Mike, let's start with you.
And I think that's a great point. And I think, people are frustrated and angry with the South African government, but I don't think that should take away from the fact of how pro-South Africa and how committed South African Jewry has always been and continues to be to make South Africa work and to be a part of this country. So I think that's a great point, and I think we should echo that we're all angry and we're all hurt, but we're still South African and we still feel this is our home and we'll fight for our home. I think, to your point, I think people want practical things that they can do, and there's been an outpouring of support for our campaign and other campaigns to help people in Israel that have been so badly affected by this tragedy. And there's a lot of humanitarian work that's being done. Also on a human level, I think there's a lot about reaching out, sending letters and support to the people of Israel, that they feel that we're with them. We're working with the schools to send letters to the kids that we've rescued in the Lavi forest, to send letters to say how much we're standing with the people of Israel, how much we care about them. I know the Zionist Federation is also doing a campaign to soldiers, to write letters to soldiers to show our support. So I think that is, on a practical level, something that we can all do is to personalize and to send our love and support to Israel. On a political level, I think the hostages should be our big issue. And that's what my gut tells me. If South Africa has relations with Hamas, we should use that and pressure this government to put pressure on Hamas to release those hostages. It's unthinkable in any concept that Hamas can hold children, babies. There are images of Hamas militiamen with guns looking after babies, holding babies hostage. We should demand unequivocally that those hostages are released immediately. And the South African government, no matter what their position on the conflict is, if they care about human rights, if they have any ounce of humanity in them, would pressure their friends in Hamas to release those children. I think that should be our number one focus as a community, politically, to mobilize. I think that's an issue that we can really gain a lot of traction around.
Thanks, Mike. I think some very good advice there. Arthur?
Yeah. Firstly, I think that's a terrific idea, Michael. And I think that's a public message that puts, and by putting out photographs. I mean, here we heard earlier about two people we now know who were in danger, right? All of us now know this beautiful couple that survived. But as I think they pointed out, there's nobody in Israel, nobody who isn't 1 degree of separation from people that are being held in Gaza or missing or hurt or killed. Or me personally, I was at a Yom Ha'atzmaut picnic 3 months ago with one of the women that's being held in Gaza. The daughter and son-in-law of a friend I used to play ball with. He and I spoke the other day about finding ways to give him a voice to speak up for his daughter. I think that needs to be put in the face of people in South Africa. That while I was in South Africa, I remember Hamas being hosted in Pretoria as if they were a legitimate partner and ally. I think it was a good idea, Michael. I think it's time to start thinking about solidarity delegations for Jews and not Jews to come here, right? Tourism went from Howard again when we were in Herzliya together in the summer. It was hopping and jammed. It's empty again. For obvious reasons, it's going to be empty for a little while, but we're going to need that to change. I'm glad you're talking about the JNF tonight, and then they do wonderful work. There are a whole school, and not in terms of competition, but there's enough for everybody, of NGOs, including little tiny ones that have formed in Israel, that are sending supplies to our soldiers, that are housing 50,000, right? We have 50,000 people who are now IDPs, right? Internally displaced people in Israel, and will be for a number of years, right? Nobody's going back to Be'eri. They're the people that are going to, where are those families going to live? We're going to need to deal with that big time in Israel. Social media, old media. Rowan, my good friend, is one of the bravest South Africans I know. He's everywhere. He's consistent. He's as Zionist as it gets, and doesn't hide it for a second. Kol hakavod, Rowan, keep it up. Let's find ways to push leaders to condemn terrorism if South Africa stands to condemn terrorism. Emphasize how what Hamas did doesn't support Palestinians. South Africa is wrong on too many issues, on Ukraine, on Israel-Palestine. Your relationship with the United States is complicated. I have such a warm memory of 2014 at the end of the war with Gaza, that there was this huge coming together in Huddle Park, right? It was in Huddle Park, Howard?
Yep.
Yes.
That I think that there were a lot of Jews there, but I don't know that we were a majority that day. I remember so many, not just dancers, but people who came all the way up from Zulu communities in southern South Africa to be with us Jews. We have a lot of friends in South Africa. We just have to find our voice, and I'm confident that you will. And if there's any way that I or other people in Israel can be of help in that regard, you know how to find us.
Rowan, the last word of the evening goes to you. How can we help?
Our priority is Israel. We are putting the Zionist Federation together, a humanitarian volunteer mission to Israel for anyone in the community who wants to assist with a range of urgent requirements. And I'll share the link in the chat, and hopefully we can distribute that to anyone who wants to join. The Kakal JNF cause is an incredible one. There are others as well. Supporting Israel financially with equipment, supplies, anything that's required is critical. And here in South Africa, and just to build on with what Arthur kindly said, we need to mobilize the South African community, beyond just the Jewish community. We need to mobilize the Christian community to show the government here that there is significant support for Israel across the board on the ground. We need to send an incredibly strong political message to our government and to this country in order to build support for Israel. And we are working very hard at that. We're working across the church groups and other places. So we encourage this community to come together to come to events, to be very active in the media, to share, retweet, respond, to share other people's interviews, to be very clear on the news and the facts. And we've actually put together a fact sheet group just for that purpose. So there's numerous ways that people can participate. But the most important is to help Israel, to help ordinary Israelis on the ground, to do whatever we can to support Israel in this extremely difficult time, and to fight the war in the media and other fronts as we do in South Africa.
It's not an easy job, but we can't lose sight of the fact that South Africa is one of the exceptions in the world. The entire civilized world has got behind Israel, understands the trauma that it's been through, and is there to help and support. The mere fact that the South African government does not understand that, does not agree with that, means that our government is completely out of step with the rest of the world and must be told as such. And we need to tell these people, for them it's theory. For us, it's personal. It's our friends, it's our family, it's our children, it's our mothers. It was a Jewish grandmother shot in the head as she went to go look after her grandchildren. A Jewish grandmother from the Free State in South Africa. It's South Africans who are missing, who are injured, and we demand from our government that they take accountability, stop their absolute nonsense, accept responsibility, show compassion, show empathy, show sympathy, and show some respect to the Jewish community that has built this country. Without us, South Africa would be much poorer off in every way, in culture, in humanitarian work, in sport, in entrepreneurship, in business. We are the people who built this country. We disproportionately contributed to South Africa far greater than any other community. And next Sunday, we as a community will celebrate the remarkable and disproportionate contribution that we have made to this country. Let those who don't support us try to see if they can do any better. Thank you for joining us this evening. We're going to be ending with Hatikva. We'll be at Jewish Achiever Awards next week, but we'll see you again and continue this discussion very soon. May peace be with you and with all the people in Israel and Palestine. Good night, everyone.